Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Life Before. Staff Sergeant Gordon Ruiz had always been a man of principle. At 34, he'd spent 12 years in the Army Rangers, with 3 deployments under his belt and a chest full of commendations that spoke to his courage and tactical brilliance. But none of that mattered as much as the photo he kept in his breast pocket, his wife Desiree and their 8-year-old son Ryan at last year's baseball game, both wearing his Rangers jersey with proud smiles. The marriage had been strong for 10 years. Desiree, a nurse at the local VA hospital, understood the demands of military life better than most. She'd met Gordon when he was recovering from shrapnel wounds in Afghanistan, and the connection had been immediate and deep. Ryan was Gordon's world, a bright kid who played Little League and collected military action figures, always asking when Daddy would come home. This deployment in Iraq had been different. Longer, more dangerous. Gordon led a specialized reconnaissance unit that gathered intelligence on insurgent movements near the Syrian border. The work was crucial but isolating, with weeks spent in forward operating bases where the only connection to home came through grainy video calls and carefully worded emails that passed military censors. The last call with Desiree had been 3 weeks ago. She'd seemed distant, distracted. When he'd asked about Ryan's game, she'd given short answers. When he'd said he missed her, she'd looked away from the camera. Gordon had attributed it to the stress of single parenting, the loneliness that came with loving a soldier. He'd promised the deployment would end soon. His brother Frank, a mechanic back in Fort Collins, Colorado, had been his lifeline at home. Frank would send updates about Ryan's school performances, neighborhood news, anything to keep Gordon connected to the life waiting for him. Frank had always been protective of Gordon's family, treating Desiree like a sister and Ryan like his own son. Gordon's reputation in his unit was legendary. Sergeant David Dawson, a grizzled 20-year veteran, often told new recruits that Gordon Ruiz could plan an operation better than most officers and execute it better than anyone. His men trusted him implicitly because Gordon never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and he never left a man behind. The Rangers had taught Gordon patience, precision, and the value of overwhelming preparation. Whether it was a night raid on a weapons cache or protecting a convoy through hostile territory, Gordon approached every mission with the same methodical thoroughness. He studied his enemies, learned their weaknesses, and struck when they least expected it. In the quiet moments between operations, Gordon would write letters to Ryan that he'd never send, teaching him about honor, courage, and standing up for what's right. He'd imagined teaching his son to drive, to throw a curveball, to be the kind of man who protected others instead of preying on them. The desert had a way of stripping away everything but what mattered most. And what mattered most to Gordon Ruiz was getting home to his family. Chapter 2. The Call. The satellite phone crackled to life at 0347 hours local time. Gordon was reviewing intelligence reports in his makeshift command center when his communications specialist approached with an expression that made Gordon's blood run cold. "Sergeant Ruiz, sir. Priority call from CONUS. Your brother." Frank's voice came through distorted by distance and encrypted channels, but the urgency was unmistakable. "Gordon, you need to sit down for this." What happened? Gordon's tactical mind immediately went to the worst possibilities: car accident, medical emergency, terrorist attack on home soil. "It's about Desiree and Ryan." Frank's voice cracked. She's been seeing someone, a cop named Craig Green. "And Gordon?" Frank paused, struggling with the words. "This bastard tossed Ryan multiple times. Said it was a game, but the kid's in the hospital." The words hit Gordon like incoming artillery. The satellite phone felt suddenly heavy in his hands. "What do you mean tossed him?" "Ryan called me crying yesterday. Said Desiree's new boyfriend brought his police gear home. Wanted to show the kid how it works. The sick freak used Ryan like a training dummy. Tossed him in the back in the arms. When Ryan screamed and tried to run, Green laughed and did it again." Gordon's vision tunneled. In the background of the call, he could hear crying, his son's voice, weak and scared. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" "He hurt me, Daddy. He hurt me, and Mommy didn't stop him." The phone slipped from Gordon's trembling hands. 12 years of military discipline, of controlled responses and measured reactions, evaporated in an instant. The command center walls seemed to close in as rage unlike anything he'd felt in combat coursed through him. Sergeant Dawson appeared at his side, having overheard enough to understand. The older man's face was grim. "Son, what do you need?" "I need to go home. Now." "That's not how this works, Ruiz. You know the procedures for emergency leave." Gordon looked at his commanding officer with eyes that had seen too much war and were now seeing something worse. "My 8-year-old son was tortured by a police officer. My wife stood by and let it happen. I'm going home, Sergeant, with or without permission." Dawson studied the younger man for a long moment. He'd seen Gordon face down enemy fire without flinching, lead successful operations under impossible odds, and maintain his composure when lesser men broke. He'd never seen him like this. "Green, you said?" Dawson asked quietly. "Craig Green, Fort Collins PD." Dawson nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. "My Jeep's fueled and ready. Take the back road to the airstrip. There's a supply flight to Ramstein leaving in 2 hours. I'll handle the paperwork after you're gone." Gordon stared at his sergeant in surprise. 23 years ago, I had a stepfather who thought discipline meant broken bones, Dawson said quietly. "Took me too long to do something about it. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same thing, Ruiz. Go handle your business." As Gordon grabbed his gear, Dawson added one final thought. "Make it count, son, and make sure that badge can't protect him from what he's got coming." Chapter 3. Homecoming. 36 hours later, Gordon stood in the pediatric ward of Fort Collins Medical Center, looking down at his son. Ryan's small body was covered in angry red marks where the electrodes had made contact. The boy's eyes, usually bright with curiosity and mischief, were dulled with trauma and confusion. "Daddy?" Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. "You came back." Gordon knelt beside the bed, his battle-hardened hands gentle as they brushed his son's hair. "I'm here, buddy. I'm here, and I'm not leaving." He said it was a game, but it hurt so much, Daddy. And Mommy, she just watched. The words were a knife in Gordon's chest. He'd faced enemy combatants who wanted to kill him, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of his child's innocence shattered by someone who'd sworn to protect and serve. Frank appeared in the doorway, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting battles he wasn't equipped for. "The doctors say he'll be okay physically, but mentally..." Frank shook his head. "Kid's been having nightmares. Won't let anyone in uniform near him. Even the paramedics had to take off their badges to get him to cooperate." "Where is she?" Gordon's voice was deadly quiet. "Home. With him." Gordon kissed Ryan's forehead. "Uncle Frank's going to stay with you, okay? I'll be back soon." The drive to the house he called home for 8 years felt surreal. Everything looked the same. The oak tree he'd planted when Ryan was born, the driveway where he'd taught his son to ride a bike, the porch where he and Desiree had shared coffee and dreams of the future. Craig Green's police cruiser sat in Gordon's driveway like a declaration of war. Gordon used his key, muscle memory, guiding him through the door he'd opened thousands of times. He found them in the living room. Desiree curled against a man who looked nothing like the protector his uniform suggested. Craig Green was big, soft around the middle, with the kind of swagger that came from a badge and a gun rather than earned confidence. "Gordon." Desiree jumped up, guilt written across her face. "You're home early." Craig remained seated, sizing up the man he'd heard about but never met. What he saw was a lean, scarred soldier in desert camouflage, with eyes that had seen combat and weren't impressed by small-town intimidation. "You must be the boyfriend," Gordon said, his voice conversational. "Craig Green, right? For Collins PD." Craig stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. "That's Officer Green to you. And you need to understand the situation here, soldier boy. Desiree's moved on. This is my house now." Gordon's smile was cold as winter in the Afghan mountains. "Your house? Interesting. See, my name's still on the mortgage. My son's room is still upstairs. And my son is in the hospital because you thought it would be fun to torture a child." It wasn't torture. Craig's voice took on a defensive edge. Kid needed to learn respect. Desiree said you're never around anyway. Someone had to teach him to be a man. The words hung in the air like smoke from an IED explosion. Gordon felt the familiar calm that preceded violence, the same clarity that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. You tossed my 8-year-old son, Gordon said quietly. Multiple times. For fun. He's fine. Kids are tougher than you think. Gordon nodded slowly, as if considering this wisdom. You know what, Craig? You're right about one thing. Kids are tougher than adults think. Tougher than cops who get their kicks hurting children. Anyway. Craig's face reddened. Watch your mouth, Ruiz. I could arrest you right now for threatening a police officer. On what grounds? I'll think of something. Gordon's laugh was genuinely amused. You know what your problem is, Green? You're used to people being afraid of that badge. Used to citizens who back down when you flex your authority. He stepped closer, and Craig instinctively stepped back. But I'm not a citizen right now. I'm a father whose child was tortured by a coward in a uniform. And that changes everything. Craig's hand moved to his gun. Don't test me, soldier. Or what? You'll taste me like you tossed Ryan? Go ahead. Draw on me. See how that works out. The challenge hung between them, loaded with 12 years of combat experience against small-town bullying. Craig's confidence wavered as he looked into eyes that had stared down trained killers and lived to tell about it. Desiree stepped between them. Stop it. Both of you. Gordon looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time since coming home. The woman who'd promised to love and honor him, who'd sworn to protect their child, who'd chosen this man over their family. Pack your things, Desiree. You and Officer Green have 24 hours to find somewhere else to play house. You can't kick us out. Watch me. Gordon's voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded men in life or death situations. And Craig, this isn't over. Not even close. You hurt my boy, and that debt hasn't been paid. Craig puffed up his chest. Is that a threat? Gordon's smile was all teeth and no warmth. No, Craig. That's a promise. Chapter 4, Reconnaissance. Gordon had learned long ago that good intelligence was the foundation of every successful mission. Over the next 3 days, while Ryan recovered under Frank's watchful care, Gordon began gathering information about Craig Green with the same systematic thoroughness he'd used to plan a raid on an enemy compound. The Fort Collins Police Department was a small-town operation with 23 officers serving a population of just over 150,000. Gordon's first stop was Maureen's Diner, a local institution where cops gathered for coffee and gossip. Dressed in civilian clothes, he nursed black coffee and listened to conversations that painted an interesting picture of Officer Green. Guy's got a real attitude problem. Gordon overheard Officer Henry Parsons tell his partner. Acts like he's SWAT when he's just traffic patrol. Been 3 complaints this month alone about excessive force during routine stops. Internal Affairs looking into it. Captain says Green's got connections. His uncle's on the city council. Cousin works for the mayor. Complaints have a way of disappearing. Gordon filed this information away and moved to his next source. May Wood, who worked dispatch, had been Desiree's friend before the separation. Over lunch at a quiet cafe, Gordon learned more about Craig's pattern of behavior. Desiree seemed so happy at first, May said, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Craig swept her off her feet, you know. Fancy dinners, expensive gifts. But then what? She started making excuses. Bruises she blamed on clumsiness. Canceling plans at the last minute. And the way he talked about you, Gordon, like you were some kind of enemy instead of a deployed soldier serving his country. What about with Ryan? May's expression darkened. Craig didn't like that Ryan still talked about you all the time. Said the boy needed a real father figure, not some weekend warrior playing soldier. When Ryan would cry about missing you, Craig would get angry. Said crying was for babies. The picture emerging was of a man who used his badge as a weapon and his position to avoid consequences. But Gordon needed more than gossip. He needed actionable intelligence. That evening, Gordon visited an old Army buddy named Spencer McLaughlin, who'd left the service to become a private investigator. Spencer owed Gordon his life from a firefight outside Kandahar, and when Gordon explained the situation, Spencer's expression turned grim. Let me make some calls, Spencer said. I've got contacts in internal affairs departments across the state. If this guy's dirty, there'll be..." 2 days later, Spencer delivered a file that made Gordon's blood boil. Craig Green had a history that the Fort Collins PD had carefully buried. In his previous job with Denver Metro, there had been 4 excessive force complaints, 2 domestic violence calls to his apartment, and a suspicious incident involving a suspect who'd suffered injuries during arrest that looked remarkably like torture. How does someone with this record get hired by another department? Gordon asked. Clean paperwork, Spencer explained. Denver was happy to see him go, so they wrote glowing references just to get him off their books. Small towns don't always dig deep when hiring, especially when a candidate has political connections. But the most damning information was recent. Spencer had uncovered a pattern of harassment targeting children of single mothers Craig had dated. 2 previous girlfriends had filed restraining orders after their children reported discipline that crossed the line into abuse. Both cases had been quietly settled out of court. This bastard got a type, Spencer said. He targets vulnerable women and their kids, uses his badge for intimidation, and has enough political protection to keep skating on consequences. Gordon studied the file, his tactical mind already working. What about his current status? Any ongoing investigations? Clean slate, officially. But there's rumbling in the department. Some of the younger officers don't like his methods, and there's talk that the new police chief might be less willing to look the other way. Who's the chief? Woman named Jacqueline Holland. Came up from Colorado Springs 6 months ago. Word is she's reform-minded, wants to clean house. But she's still feeling out the political landscape. Gordon nodded, already forming the skeleton of a plan. Craig Green had built his career on intimidation and political protection. But those same advantages could become vulnerabilities if the right pressure was applied in the right places. That night, Gordon sat in Ryan's hospital room, watching his son sleep. The boy's injuries were healing, but the psychological scars would take longer. Ryan had started flinching whenever someone approached too quickly, and loud noises sent him into panic attacks. "I'm going to make this right, buddy," Gordon whispered. "The bad man who hurt you is going to pay for what he did. Daddy promises." In Afghanistan, Gordon had learned that the most effective attacks came not from brute force, but from understanding your enemy's weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. Craig Green had spent years building a fortress of corruption and political protection. It was time to tear it down brick by brick. Chapter 5: Psychological Warfare. Gordon's military training had taught him that the best battles were won before the first shot was fired. Psychological warfare could break an enemy's will to fight, turn allies into enemies, and create opportunities where none existed before. Craig Green was about to get a masterclass in military tactics applied to civilian life. The first phase began with seemingly random encounters. Gordon knew Craig's patrol routes, his favorite coffee shop, the gym where he worked out to maintain his intimidating physique. What Craig didn't know was that the new faces appearing in his daily routine were all part of Gordon's carefully orchestrated campaign. At Muscle Beach Fitness, where Craig went every Tuesday and Thursday, Gordon had enlisted Tyler Riley, a fellow veteran who'd lost a leg in Iraq, but could still bench press more than most men with all their limbs. Tyler struck up casual conversations with Craig about law enforcement, gradually steering discussions toward excessive force and accountability. "Man, some cops give arrest a bad name," Tyler would say while spotting Craig's bench press. "Using tasers on kids? That's some sick stuff. Guy like that shouldn't be wearing a badge." Craig would brush off these comments, but Gordon could see through the gym's windows that the conversations were having an effect. Craig's workouts became more aggressive, his responses more defensive. The second prong of Gordon's psychological assault came through Veronica Klein, a reporter for the Fort Collins Tribune who'd been investigating police misconduct for months. Gordon had anonymously provided her with some of the information Spencer had uncovered, along with carefully worded tips about Craig's pattern of behavior. Veronica began showing up at crime scenes where Craig responded, asking pointed questions about use of force policies and citizen complaint procedures. She never directly accused Craig of anything, but her presence made him visibly uncomfortable, especially when she started interviewing witnesses about officer conduct. Meanwhile, Gordon had Frank spread carefully chosen rumors through the veterans community. Word began circulating that a local cop was targeting military families, using excessive force on the children of deployed soldiers. The story wasn't entirely accurate, but it contained enough truth to generate outrage among a community already suspicious of civilian authority. The psychological pressure intensified when Gordon began leaving subtle reminders of his presence in Craig's daily life. A Ranger's Challenge coin left on Craig's windshield. Desert camouflage duct tape wrapped around his home mailbox. Anonymous notes with military terminology referencing accountability and consequences. Craig's paranoia grew. He started looking over his shoulder, checking his car for tampering, varying his routines. The stress showed in his work performance. His partner, Officer Garrett Myers, noted in his daily reports that Craig seemed distracted and increasingly aggressive with civilians. "You okay, Green?" Garrett asked after Craig had unnecessarily escalated a routine traffic stop. "You seem on edge lately." "Just tired of dealing with scumbags who don't respect authority," Craig snapped. But Gordon's real masterstroke came through his manipulation of the police department's internal politics. He'd discovered that Chief Jacqueline Holland was under pressure from the city council to reduce citizen complaints and improve community relations. When anonymous packages began arriving at her office containing detailed documentation of Craig's history, complete with witness statements, medical records, and pattern analysis, she had no choice but to take notice. The packages were accompanied by professional quality psychological profiles that painted Craig as a textbook example of an officer who'd joined law enforcement for the wrong reasons. The analysis suggested that Craig's pattern of targeting vulnerable families indicated deep-seated psychological issues that made him a liability to the department. Gordon had learned in Afghanistan that the most effective intelligence operations were those where the target never realized they were under attack until it was too late. Craig Green was beginning to crack under pressure he couldn't identify or counter. The tipping point came during a department meeting where Chief Holland announced a new citizen review board and enhanced training requirements for use of force. Craig's reaction, arguing loudly that cops were being unfairly targeted by bleeding-heart liberals and that children needed to learn respect for authority, was witnessed by the entire department. "Officer Green," Chief Holland said coldly, "I think you might benefit from some counseling. Perhaps we should discuss your recent stress levels in my office." That night, Craig came home to find another message, this one spray-painted on his garage door in military stencil lettering, "Accountability incoming." For the first time since Gordon had returned from deployment, Craig Green looked genuinely afraid. As Gordon watched from a concealed position across the street, he allowed himself a small smile. In Afghanistan, this phase of operations was called shaping the battlefield. Craig's confidence was cracking, his political protection was weakening, and his allies were beginning to question his stability. Phase 2 of Gordon's plan was about to begin, and Craig Green had no idea what was coming. Chapter 6. The Trap. Gordon's years of planning complex military operations had taught him that timing was everything. The enemy had to be precisely positioned, their escape routes cut off, and their support systems neutralized before the final blow could be delivered. After 2 weeks of psychological warfare, Craig Green was exactly where Gordon wanted him, isolated, paranoid, and making increasingly desperate mistakes. The opportunity Gordon had been waiting for came in the form of a domestic violence call on Maple Street. Gordon had been monitoring police dispatch frequencies, a skill learned in the Rangers, when he heard Craig's unit assigned to respond to a 10 to 54 involving a woman and her 10-year-old son. The parallels to Ryan's situation were too perfect to be coincidental. What Craig didn't know was that the call had been orchestrated by Gordon through an elaborate setup involving Holly Cruz, a social worker who'd become an ally after learning about Ryan's assault. Holly had coached Susanna Eddy, a single mother struggling with an abusive boyfriend, to make the call at precisely the right time when Craig would be the primary responder. Gordon positioned himself with a clear view of the Eddy residence, using surveillance equipment he'd borrowed from Spencer's private investigation firm. He knew Craig's pattern: arrive alone, establish dominance, and use excessive force under the guise of controlling the situation. Craig's cruiser pulled up at 8:47 p.m., just as Gordon had calculated. The officer approached the house with his usual swagger, hand resting on his taser. Through his surveillance scope, Gordon could see Craig's face, still showing the stress and paranoia from 2 weeks of psychological pressure. Susanna met Craig at the door, playing her role perfectly. She explained that her boyfriend had become violent when her son accidentally broke a lamp, and that she'd locked herself and the boy in the bathroom until the boyfriend left. It was a textbook domestic violence scenario that should have resulted in a professional, by-the-book response. Instead, Craig's first question was, "Where's the kid?" When 10-year-old Joseph Duncan appeared, visibly scared and clinging to his mother, Craig's demeanor shifted. Gordon could see the sick satisfaction in the officer's eyes as he looked at another vulnerable child in need of discipline. "Son, come here," Craig commanded, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he'd used with Ryan. A man doesn't hide behind his mother when there's trouble. Joseph hesitated, and Craig stepped forward aggressively. "I said, come here, boy. Don't make me repeat myself." This was the moment Gordon had been waiting for. Using a military-grade directional microphone, he was recording every word of the encounter. Hidden camera Spencer had positioned earlier captured every angle as Craig grabbed Joseph's arm roughly and forced the boy to stand at attention. "Your mother called the police because she can't control you," Craig lied, his voice taking on the same menacing tone he'd used with Ryan. "Maybe what you need is to understand what happens to boys who don't listen to authority." Craig's hand moved to his taser, just as Gordon had predicted it would. The psychological pressure of the past 2 weeks, combined with his compulsive need to dominate children, had created the perfect storm. Craig was about to make the mistake that would destroy him. But Gordon wasn't content to simply document Craig's abuse. Phase 2 of his plan involved ensuring that Craig's actions would have immediate and devastating consequences. Unknown to Craig, Gordon had orchestrated the presence of multiple witnesses. Chief Holland was conducting a random patrol check in the neighborhood, having received an anonymous tip about potential misconduct. Veronica Klein from the Tribune was photographing a nearby community event and would be responding to the police scanner chatter. And most importantly, Officer Henry Parsons, the same cop who complained about Craig's methods, was positioned as backup, though Craig hadn't requested assistance. As Craig drew his taser and pointed it at Joseph, Gordon transmitted a pre-recorded emergency call on police frequencies. "Officer needs assistance. 1247, Maple Street. Suspect threatening child with weapon." The chaos that followed was exactly what Gordon had orchestrated. Chief Holland's vehicle rounded the corner just as Craig was advancing on the terrified boy with his taser drawn. Officer Parsons arrived simultaneously from the opposite direction, his dash camera recording everything. Veronica Klein appeared with her photographer, capturing images of a police officer threatening a child. "Green, stand down." Chief Holland's voice cut through the night air, like a command from a superior officer. Craig spun around, taser still in hand, to find himself surrounded by witnesses to his intended assault. The realization of his position hit him like a physical blow. He was caught in the act, with no political protection, no way to explain away what everyone had seen. "Chief, You were just about to assault a child with a weapon," Holland said, her voice deadly calm. "Drop the taser. Now." As Craig's career imploded around him, Gordon felt a cold satisfaction. This wasn't revenge, this was justice. Craig Green had finally been caught doing exactly what he'd done to Ryan, but this time there were consequences he couldn't escape. Officer Parsons moved to handcuff Craig, while Chief Holland comforted Joseph and his mother. Veronica Klein's camera captured every moment of Craig's humiliation as he was arrested by his own department. From his concealed position, Gordon watched the man who'd tortured his son being led away in handcuffs. But this was only the beginning. Craig Green's legal troubles were just starting, and Gordon had plans to ensure that justice would be thorough and complete. The trap had been sprung perfectly, and the prey had walked right into it. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The arrest of Craig Green sent shockwaves through the Fort Collins Police Department and the wider community. Within hours, Veronica Klein's photographs were on the front page of the Tribune's website, showing a uniformed officer threatening a child with a taser. The headline read, "Police Officer Arrested for Child Endangerment." But Gordon's carefully orchestrated campaign was far from over. The public arrest had been designed to create maximum exposure and ensure that Craig couldn't simply disappear into the justice system's bureaucracy. Now came the phase Gordon had been planning with military precision, ensuring that every aspect of Craig's misconduct was exposed and that justice was both swift and complete. The first blow came from Chief Holland, who had no choice but to act decisively in the face of overwhelming evidence. At a hastily called press conference, she announced Craig's suspension without pay pending a full internal investigation. But Gordon had anticipated this standard bureaucratic response and had prepared additional pressure points. Spencer McLaughlin's investigation had uncovered financial irregularities in Craig's asset disclosures, expensive purchases that far exceeded a police officer's salary. The anonymous tip that reached the FBI's white-collar crime division included detailed documentation suggesting that Craig had been receiving payments from criminal organizations in exchange for selective enforcement. While Craig sat in jail awaiting bail, federal agents raided his apartment and found evidence that validated Gordon's intelligence: large cash deposits, luxury items with no documented source, and most damning of all, a list of license plates belonging to known drug dealers who'd mysteriously avoided arrest despite multiple traffic stops. The media coverage intensified when Ryan's story became public. Holly Cruz, the social worker who'd helped Gordon orchestrate Craig's downfall, held her own press conference detailing the assault on an 8-year-old boy whose father was deployed overseas. The optics were devastating. A police officer torturing the child of a serving soldier while that soldier was defending his country. Gordon watched the coverage from Ryan's hospital room, where his son was finally showing signs of psychological recovery. The boy's nightmares had begun to fade once he understood that the bad policeman couldn't hurt him anymore. "Daddy, is he really in jail?" Ryan asked, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Yes, buddy, and he's going to stay there for a long time." The legal proceedings moved with unusual speed, helped by the overwhelming evidence and public pressure. Craig's lawyer attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but District Attorney Melinda Lamb, who was facing re-election and couldn't afford to appear soft on police misconduct, refused to consider anything less than maximum penalties. The trial itself was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. Gordon had provided evidence to the prosecution through intermediaries, ensuring that every aspect of Craig's pattern of abuse was documented and presented. Witness after witness testified to his history of excessive force, his targeting of vulnerable families, and his corrupt dealings with criminal organizations. Desiree was called to testify about the assault on Ryan. Her appearance on the witness stand was painful to watch. A woman who'd chosen her abuser over her family, now forced to confront the consequences of that choice. When the prosecutor asked why she hadn't intervened when Craig was torturing her son, her answer was barely audible. "I was afraid he'd hurt me too." The prosecution's case was so overwhelming that Craig's defense collapsed. Faced with federal corruption charges, state assault charges, and the complete destruction of his reputation, Craig finally agreed to a plea deal that would send him to prison for 12 years without the possibility of parole. But Gordon's final act of justice was personal and precise. On the day before Craig's sentencing, Gordon visited him in jail. It was the first time the two men had been alone together since their confrontation in Gordon's living room. Craig looked broken, the swagger and intimidation replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of a man who'd lost everything. When he saw Gordon approach his cell, whatever was left of his defiance crumbled. "You destroyed my life," Craig said, his voice barely a whisper. Gordon's response was calm and measured. "No, Craig. You destroyed your own life when you decided to torture children. I just made sure there were consequences. I'll get out eventually. And when I do, when you get out, you'll be a middle-aged ex-cop with a federal corruption conviction and a child abuse record. You'll be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets, and everyone will know exactly what you are." Gordon leaned closer to bars. "But more importantly, you'll know that every day you spent in prison was because you hurt my son. Every moment of fear you experience in there, every beating you take from inmates who don't like child abusers, every sleepless night wondering if you'll survive until morning, all of that is payment for what you did to Ryan. Craig's face went pale as the full implications hit him. In prison, child abusers occupied the bottom of the social hierarchy. His years as a police officer would make him an even bigger target. "Please," Craig whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" Gordon's expression didn't change. "You meant every second of it. You enjoyed it. And now you're going to pay for it with the rest of your life." As Gordon walked away from the jail, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The mission was complete. Justice had been served not through violence or revenge, but through the systematic application of pressure, evidence, and consequence. Craig Green would spend the next 12 years learning what it felt like to be powerless, afraid, and at the mercy of those stronger and more ruthless than himself. It was a fitting end for a man who'd built his identity on intimidating the innocent. Chapter 8: Aftermath. 3 months after Craig Green's sentencing, life in Fort Collins had begun to return to a new normal. The police department, under Chief Holland's reformist leadership, had implemented new training protocols and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent another Craig Green from slipping through the cracks. The Citizen Review Board was operational, and officer body cameras had become mandatory for all patrol units. Gordon had been granted extended family leave to help Ryan recover and to address the dissolution of his marriage to Desiree. The legal proceedings had been mercifully swift. Desiree's abandonment of Ryan during the assault, combined with her choice to prioritize her relationship with Craig over her son's safety, had made the custody decision straightforward. Gordon was granted full custody, with Desiree receiving only supervised visitation rights. Ryan's recovery had been remarkable. With Craig out of their lives and his father home permanently, the boy's nightmares had faded and his natural resilience had reasserted itself. Gordon had arranged for counseling, but Ryan seemed to be processing the trauma with the adaptability that children possessed. The most telling sign of his healing came when he asked to visit the police station to meet Chief Holland and the good police officers. The meeting had been arranged carefully. Chief Holland, understanding the psychological importance of Ryan seeing law enforcement as protectors rather than threats, had assembled a group of the department's most respected officers. They'd shown Ryan the station, explained how police were supposed to help people, and made sure he understood that Craig Green represented everything a police officer should never be. "Most police officers are good people who want to help kids like you," Officer Parsons had explained. "The bad one is gone now, and he can't hurt anyone anymore." Ryan had nodded solemnly, then asked the question that showed he was truly healing. "Can I see your handcuffs? I want to know how they caught the bad man." Gordon's own transition back to civilian life had been surprisingly smooth. The Army had granted him an honorable discharge with full benefits, recognizing his need to be present for his son's recovery. His years of military experience had made him an attractive candidate for private security firms, and he'd accepted a position with a company that provided protection for corporate executives and their families. The work was less dangerous than his military service, but used the same skills: threat assessment, strategic planning, and tactical execution. More importantly, it allowed him to be home every night for Ryan's bedtime routine and school activities. Frank had become a constant presence in their lives, stepping into the role of supportive uncle with enthusiasm. He'd moved closer to Gordon and Ryan, taking a job at a local auto shop and becoming the backup guardian Gordon needed. The bond between uncle and nephew had strengthened through the crisis, giving Ryan another stable male figure to rely on. Desiree's fall from grace had been complete. Her nursing license had been suspended pending an investigation into her failure to protect a child from abuse, and her reputation in the medical community was destroyed. She'd moved to Denver, where she was attempting to rebuild her life away from the constant reminders of her choices. Her supervised visits with Ryan were awkward and painful, marked by her obvious guilt and his polite but distant responses. The financial settlement of the divorce had been another victory for Gordon. Desiree's attorney had advised her to accept Gordon's terms without contest, knowing that any court proceeding would revisit her role in Ryan's assault. Gordon had kept the house, the majority of their assets, and full custody, while agreeing to pay minimal spousal support for only 2 years. Spencer McLaughlin had become more than just an investigative resource. He'd become a trusted friend who understood the complexities of transitioning from military to civilian life. The two veterans often met for coffee to discuss their experiences and the challenges of finding purpose outside the structure of military service. "You know what I respect most about how you handle Green?" Spencer had said during one of their conversations. "You could have just beaten him to death in some alley and been done with it. Instead, you used your brain and made sure justice was served through the system." Gordon had considered this observation carefully. "Violence was my first instinct. But Ryan needed to see that problems could be solved without becoming the kind of person who hurt us. I wanted him to learn that justice and revenge aren't the same thing." The community response to Craig's downfall had been overwhelmingly positive. The veterans' organizations that had initially been outraged by his treatment of Soldier's family had publicly commended Gordon's restraint and strategic approach. Local businesses had offered job opportunities and support, recognizing Gordon as someone who'd stood up for his family while maintaining his principles. Even Veronica Klein's newspaper coverage had been favorable, portraying Gordon not as a vigilante, but as a father who'd worked within the system to ensure accountability. Her follow-up articles on police reform had used Craig's case as a catalyst for broader discussions about law enforcement accountability and the protection of military families. As Gordon tucked Ryan to bed one evening, his son asked a question that showed how much he'd grown through the ordeal. "Daddy, do you think Craig learned his lesson in prison?" Gordon considered his answer carefully. "I think Craig is learning what it feels like to be powerless and afraid, which is what he made you feel. Whether that teaches him to be a better person is up to him. I hope he becomes good," Ryan said with the generous heart of a child who'd survived trauma but not been broken by it. "I don't want him to hurt any more kids." As Gordon turned off the light, he reflected on how the crisis had ultimately strengthened their family unit. Ryan had learned that his father would move heaven and earth to protect him. Gordon had learned that strategic thinking could be more powerful than brute force. And together, they'd learned that justice, when properly applied, could heal wounds that revenge could never touch. The nightmare was over, and their new life was just beginning. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 1 year after Craig Green's sentencing, Gordon Ruiz stood on the sidelines of Ryan's Little League game, watching his son pitch with the confidence of a boy who'd faced real monsters and survived. The transformation was remarkable. Where once there had been a traumatized child afraid of authority figures, now there was a resilient 9-year-old who understood the difference between protectors and predators. Ryan struck out the final batter to win the game, and his teammates rushed the mound in celebration. As Gordon watched his son's face light up with pure joy, he reflected on how completely their lives had changed. The scared, broken boy who'd called him crying from a hospital bed had grown into a confident young man who'd recently told his school counselor that he wanted to become either a soldier like his dad or a police officer like Chief Holland, one of the good ones. The coaching job had been unexpected but welcome. When the previous coach had moved away, several parents had approached Gordon to take over the team. Working with kids had become therapeutic for both father and son, allowing Gordon to use his leadership skills in a positive environment while giving Ryan a chance to see his father as a mentor to other children. Chief Holland had become an unexpected ally and friend. Her reforms had transformed the Fort Collins Police Department into a model for community policing, and she'd often consulted with Gordon on matters involving military families and veterans. When she'd offered Gordon a position as a civilian liaison for veteran affairs, he'd accepted, creating a bridge between the police department and the military community. The job allowed Gordon to continue his real calling, protecting families and ensuring accountability. He developed training programs for officers on recognizing and responding to domestic abuse, drawing on his military experience and the painful lessons learned from Craig's assault on Ryan. The programs were being adopted by police departments across Colorado, creating a legacy that would protect countless families. Frank had found love in an unexpected place. Maywood, the police dispatcher who'd provided crucial information about Craig's behavior, had begun dating Gordon's brother after meeting him at Ryan's birthday party. Their relationship had blossomed into something serious, giving Ryan another positive female influence, and Frank the family he'd always wanted but never expected to find. Desiree's supervised visits had gradually tapered off to occasional phone calls and birthday cards. Her attempts to rebuild a relationship with Ryan were hampered by her obvious guilt and his polite but distant responses. The boy who'd once adored his mother now treated her like a distant relative, civil but uninvested. It was perhaps the most fitting consequence of her choices, the loss of her son's trust and affection. The legal aftermath of Craig's case had continued to unfold throughout the year. Federal investigators had uncovered a corruption network that extended beyond Craig to several other officers and city officials. The scandal had resulted in a complete overhaul of city government and police leadership, with Chief Holland emerging as one of the few authority figures to enhance her reputation through the crisis. Craig himself had not adapted well to prison life. Reports filtered back through Spencer's contacts that the former officer had been repeatedly assaulted by inmates who despised child abusers and corrupt cops. He'd been moved to protective custody 3 times, living in isolation that mirrored the psychological warfare Gordon had waged against him before his arrest. "He's got 8 more years, Spencer had reported during one of their coffee meetings. Word is he's aged a decade since going in. Turns out being powerless and afraid isn't as fun when you're the one experiencing it." Gordon felt no satisfaction in Craig's suffering. That wasn't why he'd orchestrated the man's downfall. The purpose had been justice and protection, ensuring that Craig could never hurt another child. Whether Craig suffered or learned from his experience was irrelevant as long as he remained caged. The annual Veterans Barbecue had become a tradition in the Ruiz household, with Gordon hosting fellow soldiers and their families in his backyard. This year's gathering was special. It marked Ryan's decision to present a school project about military families to his classmates, sharing his story as an example of resilience and the importance of supporting deployed soldiers' children. As Gordon watched Ryan confidently address the crowd of veterans, he marveled at his son's strength. The boy spoke about the importance of protecting military families, about the difference between good authority figures and bad ones, and about how his father had taught him that standing up for what's right sometimes required patience and strategy, rather than anger and violence. "My dad could have hurt the bad policeman," Ryan told the assembled veterans. "But instead, he used his brain to make sure the bad man got caught and punished the right way. That's what real soldiers do. They protect people without becoming bullies themselves." The applause was thunderous, and Gordon felt pride swell in his chest. Ryan had not only survived his trauma, but had learned the lessons Gordon had hoped to teach: that strength should protect the innocent, that justice was more important than revenge, and that sometimes the greatest victory was showing mercy to those who'd shown none to you. Later that evening, as Gordon tucked Ryan into bed, his son asked the question that had become their nightly ritual. "Tell me about the mission tomorrow, Daddy." It was a game they developed, with Gordon describing the next day's activities using military terminology that made ordinary life sound like important operations. Tomorrow's mission included a school presentation by a police officer, carefully vetted by Chief Holland, a Little League practice session, and a dinner with Uncle Frank and May. "Remember, soldier," Gordon said, playing his part in their ritual, "your mission is to learn something new, help a teammate, and have fun. Can you handle that assignment?" "Yes, sir," Ryan replied with a grin. Mission accepted. As Gordon watched his son drift off to sleep, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, he'd been a deployed soldier whose family was under attack by a predator in uniform. Today, he was a father whose son was thriving, a community member working to protect other families, and a man who'd learned that true victory came not from destroying one's enemies, but from building something better from the ashes of their defeat. Craig Green had sought to break their family and had instead made them stronger. He'd tried to use his authority to hurt the innocent and had ended up exposing the corruption that allowed such abuse to flourish. His legacy would be the reforms that protected countless other families from experiencing what the Ruiz family had endured. Outside Ryan's window, the Colorado night was peaceful. The house that had once been invaded by a uniformed predator was now a safe haven where a father and son had rebuilt their lives stronger than before. Justice had been served. not through revenge or vigilante violence, but through patient strategic action that had changed an entire community for the better. Gordon Ruiz had learned in the desert that the best battles were won not by the strongest or most ruthless, but by those who understood their mission and executed it with precision. His mission had been simple: protect his son and ensure justice for those who'd harmed him. Mission accomplished. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Storm. Terrence Ware had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, impenetrable. At 35, he owned a chain of high-end security consulting firms that protected the wealthy elite of San Francisco. His reputation for discretion and ruthless efficiency had made him indispensable to people who valued their secrets above their lives. The irony wasn't lost on him that the man who protected others' secrets would soon discover the devastating ones hidden in his own home. Terrence's marriage to Danielle Golden had been a strategic alliance that blossomed into genuine love, or so he believed. She came from old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, and her father, Randall Golden, owned half the shipping lanes on the West Coast. Their daughter, Emma, now 8 years old, was the light of Terrence's world, a precocious child with her mother's beauty and his analytical mind. The family cruise had been Randall's idea, a celebration of Golden Shipping's 50th anniversary. The luxurious 200-foot yacht carried only family and close associates, floating through the pristine waters off the California coast. Terrence had noticed the subtle changes in Danielle's behavior over the past months. The distant looks, the carefully guarded phone, the sudden interest in yoga classes that seemed to run longer each week. But tonight, as he watched her from the upper deck, everything clicked into place with the precision of a sniper's scope. Danielle stood at the stern, silhouetted against the moonlight, embracing a man Terrence recognized immediately. Zachary Winters, Randall's head of operations and the golden boy of Golden Shipping. The embrace wasn't familial. The kiss that followed wasn't friendly. And the words Terrence overheard through the night breeze cut deeper than any blade. After this weekend, we'll be free, Zachary whispered. Your father's plan will work perfectly. Emma's such a burden anyway, Danielle replied, her voice carrying a coldness Terrence had never heard before. She looks too much like him. It'll be easier this way. Terrence's blood turned to ice. Whatever plan they were discussing involved his daughter, and from the tone, it wasn't meant to end well for either of them. He retreated to his cabin, his mind racing through possibilities. In his line of work, he learned to think 10 steps ahead of his enemies. He'd just never imagined his enemies would be sleeping in his bed. That night, Terrence lay awake listening to Danielle's breathing beside him, every rise and fall a betrayal. He thought about Emma sleeping in the adjoining cabin, innocent and trusting, unaware that the people she loved most were plotting against her. The protective instinct that had made him successful in his business now focused on his daughter with laser intensity. By dawn, Terrence had made his decision. He would not wait for their plan to unfold. He would force their hand, make them reveal themselves, and then he would destroy them all. Chapter 2. Blood in the Water. The second day of the cruise dawned with deceptive calm. Terrence moved through the morning routines with practiced normalcy. Breakfast with Emma, casual conversation with the other guests, polite interactions with Randall and his crew. But beneath the surface, he was a predator circling his prey. Terrence's security background had taught him that the best intelligence came from letting people think they were unobserved. He'd spent the morning discreetly planting micro-recording devices throughout the yacht, gifts from his own company's surveillance division. Every conversation would now be captured, every whispered plan documented. The devices paid off faster than he'd anticipated. At lunch, while Emma played with her cousins, Terrence listened through his encrypted earpiece as Randall met with Zachary in the ship's office. What he heard shattered any remaining illusions about the Golden family's true nature. The insurance alone will set us up for life. Randall's gravelly voice crackled through the feed. Tragic accident. Father and daughter lost at sea. Danielle inherits everything as the grieving widow. Then we restructure the company with Zachary as the new CEO. What about the investigation? Zachary asked. Terrence has too many enemies in his line of work. Could be any number of people who wanted him dead. The authorities will chase ghosts while we count money. And Emma? Collateral damage. She's Terrence's daughter, not mine. Never like how he tried to turn her against traditional family values anyway, filling her head with ideas about being independent. Terrence's hands clenched into fists. The casual way they discussed murdering his daughter, their own flesh and blood, revealed a level of evil he'd only encountered in his darkest professional cases. But it was Danielle's voice that truly broke something inside him. I never wanted children anyway, she said, her tone as flat as if discussing the weather. Zachary and I talked about this. We want to travel, live freely. Emma's just an inconvenience we inherited from my mistake with Terrence. Your father's right about one thing, Zachary added. She's got too much of him in her. Too smart, too observant. She'd figure things out eventually. The recording captured the sound of glasses clinking, a toast to their daughter's murder. Terrence removed his earpiece and looked across the deck at Emma, who was laughing as she played tag with her cousins. The innocence in her eyes, the complete trust she had in the adults around her, strengthened his resolve. These people had mistaken his love for weakness, his civility for vulnerability. They were about to learn the difference between a protective father and a predator unleashed. That afternoon, Terrence began implementing his own plan. He sent encrypted messages to his most trusted associates, men who understood that loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished without mercy. By evening, pieces would be in motion that would ensure his family's enemies faced consequences they couldn't imagine. But first, he needed them to make their move. He needed them to reveal themselves completely, to commit fully to their betrayal, so that when justice came, it would be absolute and undeniable. As the sun began to set on the second day, Terrence watched his wife prepare for what she thought would be his final evening alive. She had no idea she was actually preparing for her own downfall. Chapter 3. The Abyss Gazes Back. The third evening arrived with gathering storm clouds that seemed to mirror the darkness building in Terrence's heart. He had spent the day playing the role of the oblivious husband and father, while his hidden recordings captured every detail of the conspiracy against him and Emma. The most damning revelation had come during Danielle's afternoon conversation with her sister Caroline, who was also aboard the yacht with her husband Brooks. Are you really going through with this? Caroline had asked, her voice trembling. It's the only way, Danielle replied coldly. Terrence will never agree to a divorce, and his prenup protects all his assets. This way, I inherit everything, and Zachary gets control of Dad's company. It's perfect, but Emma's just a child. She's his child, not mine. I've pretended to love her for 8 years, Caroline. 8 years of playing mother to a girl who looks at me like she can see right through me. She's too much like him, calculating, always watching. She'd expose us eventually. What Terrence found most chilling wasn't just the planned murder, but the complete absence of maternal instinct. Danielle spoke about Emma, like she was discussing the disposal of unwanted furniture. The recording also revealed that this wasn't a sudden decision. They'd been planning this for over a year, carefully choosing the perfect moment when they'd all be isolated at sea, far from immediate help. As evening fell, Terrence's associates had confirmed receipt of his instructions. Miles away, other wheels were already turning. But tonight, on this yacht, surrounded by his enemies, Terrence would play his most dangerous game yet. The family gathered for what Randall announced would be a special evening celebration. The champagne flowed freely, and Emma delighted in being allowed to stay up late with the adults. Terrence watched his daughter with fierce protectiveness, memorizing every laugh, every gesture, knowing that after tonight, everything would change forever. Around 10 o'clock, as the yacht sailed through increasingly choppy waters, Randall stood and raised his glass. To family, he declared, his eyes meeting Terrence's with what looked like triumph. To bonds that can never be broken. The toast was their signal. Terrence could see it in their eyes. Danielle's forced smile, Zachary's nervous energy, Randall's predatory satisfaction. They thought they were looking at a dead man. Actually, Terrence said, standing slowly, I have something to say first. He pulled out a small device, a signal transmitter that would broadcast to his security team. But more importantly, it would also transmit the recordings he'd gathered to a secure server, ensuring evidence of their conspiracy would survive whatever happened next. I know, he said simply. The words hung in the air like a sword. Danielle's face went pale. Zachary took a step backward, and Randall's expression shifted from triumph to calculation. Know what? Randall asked, but his hand was already moving toward the inside of his jacket. I know about the insurance policies. I know about the planned accident. I know you've been planning to murder me and my daughter. Emma looked up from her game, confusion clouding her young face. Daddy? What's happening? Before anyone could respond, Randall's mask finally slipped completely. His face contorted with rage as he lunged forward, grabbing Emma roughly by the arm. You think you're so smart? He snarled. You think your little security business makes you untouchable? A child from you doesn't belong in this family. With shocking brutality, he lifted the screaming 8-year-old and hurled her over the yacht's railing into the dark, churning waters below. The splash seemed to echo in slow motion as Terrence's world exploded into action. Without hesitation, he vaulted over the railing after his daughter, hitting the cold Pacific with the determination of a man who would either save his child or die trying. Behind him on the yacht, he could hear Danielle's voice, cold and final. Dad is right. She's worthless. Those words, spoken about their own daughter as she struggled in the deadly waters, sealed every fate that would follow. In that moment, as Terrence fought the waves to reach Emma, something fundamental died inside him. Something that had once believed in mercy, in forgiveness, in second chances. They had no idea what he would do next. But they would learn, and the lesson would be written in blood and betrayal, reaching far beyond this yacht, touching lives they'd never considered, and awakening a darkness in Terrence that would remake their entire world. As he pulled Emma's shivering form against him in the black water, Terrence made a silent promise. They had shown him their true nature. Now he would show them his. Chapter 4. Resurrection and Reckoning. Terrence and Emma spent 14 hours in the Pacific, clinging to a life preserver that Terrence had managed to grab during his desperate dive. The yacht had disappeared into the night, leaving them to die as planned. But what the Golden family didn't know was that Terrence's security training included survival tactics that went far beyond their imagination. As dawn broke, a Coast Guard helicopter appeared on the horizon. Terrence's emergency beacon, a device he always carried, known only to his most trusted associate Marcel Glover, had been transmitting their location all night. The rescue was swift and professional, but more importantly, it was documented. Thank God you're alive, the Coast Guard captain said as they were pulled aboard. When we got the report that you'd both been lost overboard, we feared the worst. Report? Terrence asked, though he already knew the answer. Your family filed it this morning. Said you'd both fallen overboard during the storm, and they couldn't find you in the dark. Emma, wrapped in emergency blankets and still shaking from trauma and hypothermia, looked up at her father with eyes that had aged years in a single night. Daddy, why did Grandpa do that? Why did Mommy say I was worthless? Terrence held his daughter close, feeling the fire of vengeance burning away any remaining doubt. Because they're not our family anymore, sweetheart. But don't worry, Daddy's going to fix this. The Coast Guard delivered them to San Francisco General Hospital, where Terrence's associates were already waiting. Marcel Glover, a mountain of a man who'd served with Terrence in military intelligence before joining his security firm, approached with the grim efficiency of a battlefield medic. Boss, we've got problems and solutions, Marcel said quietly as Emma was taken for medical evaluation. The problems, they filed life insurance claims this morning. Started moving assets before your bodies were even supposed to be found. Zachary's already been named interim CEO of Golden Shipping. And the solutions? Marcel's smile was razor sharp. The recordings you transmitted were received and backed up. We've got everything. But more importantly, Randall Golden has no idea who he just made an enemy of. While Emma slept under medical supervision, Terrence learned the full scope of his family's betrayal. Not only had they planned his murder, but they'd been systematically looting his companies for months, transferring assets to offshore accounts controlled by shell companies linked to Zachary. But their biggest mistake had been underestimating who Terrence really was. Marcel, it's time they learned what we do to people who hurt children, Terrence said, his voice carrying the cold finality of a death sentence. Which protocol, boss? All of them. That afternoon, while Danielle played the grieving widow for the media and Randall celebrated with champagne in his penthouse office, Terrence began implementing a plan that would make their nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. His first call was to Jeremiah Alexander, a former CIA operative who now handled Terrence's most sensitive overseas operations. The second was to Dwight Moreno, whose specialty was making people disappear without a trace. The third was to Hannah Schaefer, a former federal prosecutor who discovered that justice sometimes required operating outside the law. Each of them owed Terrence their lives, and each of them understood that some sins demanded punishment beyond what any court could deliver. They think they killed us, Terrence told his assembled team that evening in a secure facility outside the city. Emma was safely hidden in a private medical facility under assumed names, guarded by operators who would die before letting harm come to her. They think they're celebrating their victory. They think they're safe. They think wrong. The room filled with the kind of silence that preceded violence. These weren't ordinary security consultants. They were Terrence's inner circle, men and women who'd followed him from the darkest corners of military intelligence into the private sector. They were professionals who understood that some enemies couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or reformed. They could only be destroyed. I want them to understand what they've done, Terrence continued. I want them to experience every moment of fear my daughter felt when she hit that water. I want them to feel helpless, betrayed, and abandoned. And when they're broken completely, when they beg for mercy they'll never receive, I want them to know it was because they tried to murder a child. Marcel cracked his knuckles. Where do we start, boss? Terrence pulled up a holographic display showing the Golden family's entire network. Shipping routes, financial holdings, family members, associates, weaknesses. It was a web of connections they'd built over decades, and Terrence was about to turn each strand into a noose. We start by making them vulnerable, he said. Then we make them suffer. Then we make them disappear. Chapter 5. The hunter becomes the hunted. 3 days after their deaths, Terrence's revenge machine began operating with the precision of a Swiss watch. The first phase was psychological warfare designed to make his enemies paranoid and sloppy. Zachary Winters was the first to crack. On Monday morning, he arrived at Golden Shipping's headquarters to find his office stripped bare. Security claimed they had video footage of Zachary himself authorizing the removal of all furniture and personal items, though Zachary had no memory of such authorization. His access cards had been deactivated, his parking space reassigned, and his company credit cards declined. When he demanded answers from Randall, he found the old man in a similar state of confusion. Strange packages had been delivered to Randall's home. Packages containing surveillance photos of his most private moments, recordings of conversations he thought were secret, and detailed financial records of accounts he'd thought were hidden. Someone's playing games with us, Zachary said, pacing Randall's office like a caged animal. This has to be connected to Terrence somehow. Terrence is dead, Randall growled, but his voice lacked conviction. We watched him go over the side. Then who the hell is doing this? Neither man noticed the micro-drone hovering outside the 60th-floor window, recording their every word for Terrence's analysis. Meanwhile, Danielle was experiencing her own psychological torment. She'd awakened that morning to find all of Terrence's belongings exactly as he'd left them. Clothes laid out for a day he'd never see, coffee mug still containing his last cup, his computer displaying family photos she thought she'd deleted. When she demanded to know who'd been in her house, The security company claimed she'd authorized the restoration herself. But the most unsettling development was Emma's room. Danielle had planned to pack away her daughter's belongings immediately, wanting to erase all traces of the child she'd helped murder. Instead, she found a room exactly as Emma had left it, down to homework assignments spread on the desk and a half-finished drawing of their family. The drawing showed Terrence and Emma holding hands on a beach, smiling in the sun. Danielle wasn't in the picture at all. That night, Danielle called Zachary in a panic. "Something's wrong. I keep hearing Emma's voice in the house. I swear I saw her reflection in the bathroom mirror, but when I turned around, nothing was there." "You're imagining things," Zachary replied, but his own voice was shaky. "Guilt can make you see things that aren't there." "I don't feel guilty," Danielle snapped. "I feel like I'm being watched." She was right. From a van parked 3 blocks away, Jeremiah Alexander monitored every room in her house through cameras so small they were invisible to the naked eye. Every movement, every conversation, every moment of growing paranoia was being recorded and analyzed. "She's breaking faster than expected," Jeremiah reported to Terrence. "Another few days of this, and she'll be ready for phase 2. Terrence watched the surveillance feeds with cold satisfaction. Emma was healing in the secure facility, working with trauma specialists who were helping her process what had happened. She was stronger than her mother in every way that mattered, and she was alive. That was all that mattered to him now. "What about Randall?" Terrence asked. "He's the toughest nut, but we're making progress." Hannah's people have been visiting his business partners, asking questions about Golden Shipping's insurance policies and recent changes in leadership. Half his board is already talking about calling an emergency meeting. And Zachary? Marcel's grin was predatory. "Zachary's about to have a very bad day. Turns out his mother, Vicky Winters, has some interesting secrets. Secrets that could destroy more than just his career if they came to light." Terrence felt a moment of satisfaction. In his previous life, he believed in justice through legal channels, in building cases and following procedures. But his enemies had taught him that some crimes required more direct justice. They'd murdered his child, or tried to. They'd shown him that mercy was weakness, that forgiveness was foolishness. Now he would show them what real power looked like when it was wielded without restraint. "Phase 2 begins tomorrow," Terrence announced. "It's time to start taking things away from them. Everything they value, everything they think makes them safe. By the time we're done, they'll beg for the mercy they never showed Emma." "And if they try to run?" Marcel asked. Terrence's smile was arctic. "Where can they go that we can't follow? We're not bound by jurisdictions or legal procedures anymore. We're not playing by their rules." "What rules are we playing by?" "Simple," Terrence replied, watching Danielle pace her living room like a caged animal. "They chose to become monsters. Now they get to learn what real monsters look like." Chapter 6. The Walls Close In. The second phase of Terrence's campaign began with surgical precision. While his enemies struggled with psychological pressure, he began systematically dismantling their lives piece by piece. Zachary discovered the extent of his vulnerability when he arrived home to find his mother, Vicky, sitting in his living room, tears streaming down her face, clutching a manila envelope. "What happened?" he asked, but the look in her eyes already told him everything he needed to know. "They know," she whispered. "About Nevada. About what happened 20 years ago." Zachary's blood turned to ice. The Nevada incident was supposed to be buried forever. A hit-and-run accident that had killed a family of 4 while Vicky was driving drunk. Zachary had been 17, and his mother had used the Golden family's influence to cover it up, framing a homeless man who died in police custody before he could defend himself. "How is that possible?" Zachary demanded, snatching the envelope. Inside were police photos from the original accident scene, evidence that had supposedly been destroyed decades ago, and detailed financial records showing how the cover-up had been orchestrated. "There's more," Vicky said, her voice breaking. "They have everything. Video footage from the gas station where I stopped after the accident, showing me washing blood off the car. Banking records of the payments we made to the police chief. Even audio recordings of phone calls we made that night. The envelope also contained a single photograph. Emma's school picture, with a note written in a child's handwriting. Some secrets don't stay buried forever. Zachary felt the world tilting around him. Whoever was doing this wasn't just targeting him. They were targeting everyone he cared about, forcing him to choose between protecting himself and protecting his mother. Meanwhile, Randall Golden was discovering that his empire was built on far shakier ground than he'd imagined. His shipping contracts were being mysteriously canceled, with clients claiming they'd received evidence of safety violations and environmental crimes. His bank accounts were frozen, pending investigations into money laundering allegations. His insurance policies were being reviewed for fraud. But the most devastating blow came when his daughter Caroline called in a panic. "Dad, they took Brooks," she sobbed into the phone. Men in suits showed up at his office with federal badges. They said he's being charged with human trafficking. "That's impossible," Randall snarled. "Brooks doesn't have anything to do with that side of the business." The silence on the line was deafening. Caroline's voice, when it came, was small and terrified. "What side of the business, Dad?" Randall realized his mistake too late. His son-in-law, Brooks, had never known about the Golden family's darker enterprises, the cargo containers that carried more than legitimate goods, the shipping routes that moved people who didn't want to be found. It was a secret Randall had guarded for decades, and now it was being used to destroy his family from within. "Listen to me carefully," a calm voice said on Caroline's line. Randall realized someone else had been listening to their conversation. "Brooks will be released when you're ready to discuss terms." "Who is this?" Randall demanded. "Someone who cares about children," the voice replied. "Unlike you." The line went dead, leaving Randall staring at his phone in fury and growing fear. Danielle's psychological breakdown accelerated when she arrived home to find a social worker waiting in her driveway. "Mrs. Ware? I'm Terry Roach from Child Protective Services. We've received some concerning reports about your household's safety standards." "That's impossible," Danielle said, her voice rising. "There are no children here anymore." Terry's expression grew cold. "No children? According to our records, you have an 8-year-old daughter named Emma. We have reports that she hasn't been seen for several days, and her school is asking questions." Danielle's mind raced. In her eagerness to erase Emma from her life, she'd forgotten that the outside world still expected a living child to exist. Teachers, neighbors, family friends, they would all eventually ask questions about Emma's absence. She's with relatives," Danielle stammered. "Which relatives?" "We'll need to verify her safety immediately." As Terry pulled out an official form, Danielle realized she was trapped. She couldn't produce a living child who was supposedly dead, but she couldn't explain Emma's absence without admitting to murder. "I need to make some phone calls," she said weakly. "Of course. We'll wait." But there was nowhere to call, no one who could help her explain away a murdered child. For the first time since this nightmare began, Danielle understood that she might have made a mistake she couldn't escape. That evening, the three conspirators met in Randall's office, their earlier confidence replaced by growing desperation. "This is Terrence," Zachary said, his hands shaking as he poured himself a drink. "Somehow, he survived, and now he's coming for us." "Terrence is dead," Randall insisted. "We saw him go into the water." "Then explain this," Danielle snapped, throwing down photos that had been left on her doorstep. The images showed all three of them on the yacht, captured from angles that revealed their conspiracy in perfect detail. "Explain how a dead man took these pictures." Randall studied the photos, his face growing pale. "These weren't taken from a yacht. Someone was watching us from another vessel." "Or from the water," Zachary said quietly. "What if Terrence didn't go in to save Emma? What if he knew what we were planning and was already prepared?" The possibility hung in the air like a death sentence. If Terrence had anticipated their betrayal, if he'd been planning his own countermove while they thought they were in control, then they weren't dealing with a grieving father seeking justice. They were dealing with a predator who had been hunting them from the beginning. "What do we do?" Danielle asked, and for the first time since the yacht, her voice carried genuine fear. Before anyone could answer, all of their phones chimed simultaneously with incoming messages. Each message contained the same image, Emma's drawing of her and her father on the beach, with new text added in red ink. "She's alive. You failed. Now you pay." Chapter 7. The Devil's Due. The revelation that Emma was alive sent shockwaves through the conspiracy that shattered their remaining composure. What had been a carefully planned murder was now exposed as an attempted child killing, and the legal ramifications alone could destroy them. But Terrence wasn't interested in legal justice anymore. Zachary cracked first. The pressure of knowing his mother could be destroyed by the Nevada evidence, combined with the growing certainty that Terrence was orchestrating an elaborate revenge scheme, drove him to desperation. He made the fatal mistake of trying to run. Marcel's team intercepted him at San Francisco International Airport, where Zachary had purchased a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country using a fake passport. The confrontation was swift and professional. "Zachary Winters," Marcel said, approaching him at the gate with the casual confidence of a predator cornering wounded prey. "Mr. Ware would like a word." "I don't know any Mr. Ware," Zachary replied, but his voice cracked with terror. "Funny thing about that," Marcel continued, producing a tablet that showed surveillance footage of Zachary throwing Emma overboard. "The Coast Guard has been very interested in this video. Amazing what technology can capture these days." Zachary's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a chair. What does he want? Truth, justice, and payment for what you did to his daughter. When Zachary was brought to Terrence's secure facility, he found himself face-to-face with a man he barely recognized. The Terrence he'd known had been civilized, controlled, almost diplomatic in his business dealings. This Terrence was something else entirely, a creature carved from ice and fury, with eyes that held no warmth, no mercy, no humanity. "You threw my 8-year-old daughter into the ocean," Terrence said without preamble. "You helped plan our murders. You conspired to steal everything I'd built. But worst of all, you made Emma afraid." "I'm sorry," Zachary babbled. "It was Randall's idea. Danielle was the one who—" "I don't want apologies," Terrence interrupted. "I want you to understand what comes next." He gestured to a wall of monitors showing surveillance feeds from various locations. Zachary recognized his mother's house, Randall's office, Danielle's home, and dozens of other places connected to their conspiracy. "Your mother's case is already being reopened. The evidence of her hit and run will be released to the media tomorrow morning. Her nursing license will be revoked, her assets frozen, and she'll spend the rest of her life in prison." "Please," Zachary begged. "She's an old woman. She's suffered enough. Did you think Emma was too young to suffer when you threw her into the Pacific?" Terrence asked, "But I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you a choice." A door opened, and Emma walked in, healthy and whole, but changed by her ordeal. She looked at Zachary with the kind of clear-eyed assessment that belonged on an adult's face, not a child's. "Hello, Mr. Winters," she said calmly. "You tried to kill me." Zachary couldn't meet her gaze. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I never wanted—" "Yes, you did," Emma interrupted. "I heard you planning it. You said I was too smart, too observant. You were right about that." Terrence placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Emma deserves to see justice for what you did to her. So here's your choice, Zachary. You can confess everything. The murder attempt, the financial fraud, Randall's human trafficking operation, and your mother will be allowed to serve her sentence in minimum security. Or you can stay silent, and she'll face maximum charges for the Nevada killings plus conspiracy to commit murder." "What about me?" Zachary asked. "You?" Terrence smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Zachary had ever seen. "You don't get choices anymore. You lost that right when you touched my daughter." The confession session lasted 6 hours. Zachary revealed everything. The months of planning, the financial schemes, the insurance fraud, and most damaging of all, the details of Randall Golden's criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond simple shipping. By the time he was finished, Terrence had enough evidence to destroy not just the immediate conspirators, but their entire network of corruption. Meanwhile, Danielle was discovering that her world was collapsing from within. The social worker's investigation had triggered a cascade of legal problems. The life insurance companies were launching fraud investigations. Her father's associates were distancing themselves from the Golden family. And most terrifyingly, people were asking questions about Emma that she couldn't answer. When Randall finally realized the scope of what they were facing, He made his own desperate play. He contacted his most dangerous associates, men who solved problems through violence, who understood that sometimes witnesses needed to disappear permanently. But Terrence had anticipated this move. When Randall's hired killers arrived at the secure facility, they found themselves outnumbered, outgunned, and facing opponents who'd spent years fighting in places where rules didn't exist. "Send them back to Randall with a message," Terrence told Marcel as they zip-tied the surviving attackers. "Tell him that he's escalated this to a level he can't handle. Tell him that if he wants a war, he'll get one. But it won't be the kind of war he's prepared for." As night fell over San Francisco, Terrence looked out at the city lights and felt the cold satisfaction of a plan coming together. His enemies had revealed themselves completely, committed crimes they couldn't take back, and shown their true nature to the world. Now came the final phase, the phase where they would learn that some sins couldn't be forgiven, some debts couldn't be paid, and some enemies couldn't be escaped. Emma appeared beside him, looking older than her 8 years. "Daddy, are you going to kill them?" Terrence considered the question seriously. "What do you think should happen to people who try to hurt children?" "I think," Emma said carefully, "that they should never be able to hurt anyone ever again." "Then that's what we'll make sure happens," Terrence replied. "One way or another." Chapter 8, Blood and Ashes. The final confrontation began at dawn when federal agents, armed with evidence provided by Terrence's confession sessions, simultaneously raided Golden Shipping headquarters, Randall's mansion, and Danielle's home. But by then, the legal system was just catching up to justice that had already been served. Randall Golden was found in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire. Every shipping contract had been canceled, every bank account frozen, every illegal operation exposed. His criminal associates had either fled the country or been arrested in coordinated raids. His own security team had abandoned him, leaving him alone in a building that would soon be seized by federal marshals. But Terrence wasn't interested in letting the law have the final word. "Hello, Randall," Terrence said, walking into the office with Emma at his side. "I thought you might want to see what survival looks like." Randall's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, rage, and finally fear as he understood that his carefully planned murder had failed completely. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You went into the water. We saw you both go under. You saw what you expected to see," Terrence replied. "A desperate father trying to save his daughter. You never considered that I might have been expecting your betrayal, that I might have been prepared for your attack." Emma stepped forward, her young face carrying an expression of mature judgment that would have been heartbreaking under different circumstances. "Grandpa, why did you throw me in the ocean?" Randall couldn't meet her eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, you don't understand. Business requires difficult decisions sometimes." "I understand that you tried to kill me because I looked too much like Daddy," Emma replied. "I understand that you thought I was worthless. I understand that you never loved me at all." The simple truth from a child's lips hit Randall harder than any accusation. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes that might have been regret. But it was too late for regret. "The FBI will be here soon," Terrence said. "They'll arrest you for human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and about 50 other charges. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, assuming you survive that long. Human traffickers don't fare well in federal facilities." "What do you want from me?" Randall asked. "I want you to know that this is Emma's justice," Terrence replied. "Every charge, every consequence, every moment of suffering you'll experience, it's because you tried to murder a child, your own granddaughter. And I want you to live with that knowledge for however long you have left." Meanwhile, Danielle's confrontation with reality was reaching its climax. Unable to produce a living daughter for the social workers, faced with insurance investigators who discovered the conspiracy, and abandoned by her criminal associates, she'd been reduced to a trembling wreck of her former self. When Terrence and Emma arrived at what had once been their family home, they found Danielle sitting in Emma's room, staring at the pictures and toys of the daughter she'd helped try to murder. "She was beautiful," Danielle said without turning around. "I used to look at her sometimes and wonder how I could feel so empty when I looked at my own child." "Because you're broken inside," Emma said simply. Good mothers don't help people hurt their children. Danielle finally turned, and the sight of Emma, alive, healthy, and clearly loved, broke something fundamental in her already fragmented psyche. "This isn't real," she whispered. "You're dead. We watched you die. You watched me almost die," Emma corrected. "But Daddy saved me, because that's what real fathers do." Terrence watched his wife and daughter face each other across an unbridgeable chasm of betrayal and blood. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, no healing. Some wounds were too deep, some betrayals too complete. "The FBI is outside," Terrence said. "They have enough evidence to convict you of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. You'll never see the outside of a prison cell. But first, I want you to understand something," he continued. "Every choice you made, every lie you told, every plan you hatched, every moment you spent plotting Emma's death led you to this moment. You destroyed your own life because you couldn't love your own child." "I did love her," Danielle protested weakly. "No," Emma said with the clarity that only children possess. "You love the idea of having a family, but you never loved me, and now you never will." As federal agents entered the house to arrest Danielle, Terrence felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. His enemies hadn't just been defeated. They'd been exposed for what they truly were, and their punishment would match their crimes. But the most important victory was standing beside him, holding his hand with a trust that had never wavered even in the darkest moments. "Are we going home now, Daddy?" Emma asked. "We are home," Terrence replied. "Wherever we are together, that's home." As they walked away from the house where their old life had died, neither of them looked back. Some chapters had to end completely before new ones could begin. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 6 months later, Terrence and Emma stood on the deck of their new home, a security-enhanced compound overlooking the Pacific, where the same waters that had nearly claimed their lives now served as a reminder of their survival. The legal proceedings had concluded with the ruthless efficiency of absolute evidence. Randall Golden received a life sentence for human trafficking and attempted murder, dying of a heart attack in his cell 3 months into his sentence. Zachary Winters received 25 years for conspiracy and attempted murder, while his mother was given a lighter sentence in exchange for testimony about the Nevada cover-up. Danielle received life without parole and would spend her remaining years in solitary confinement for her own protection. Child killers weren't popular in women's prison. But the legal victories were just the beginning of Terrence's reconstruction project. Golden Shipping had been dissolved, its legitimate assets distributed to the families of human trafficking victims, its criminal networks dismantled by international law enforcement. Terrence's security firm had expanded into a global operation focused on protecting vulnerable children and hunting predators who thought wealth and influence made them untouchable. Emma, now 9 years old, was thriving in ways that amazed her trauma counselors. The experience that would have destroyed many children had instead forged her into something unique. A child who understood darkness but chose light, who knew evil but embraced good, who had seen the worst of humanity but still believed in justice. "Daddy, Marcel's here," Emma announced, pointing to the approaching helicopter. Their weekly security briefing had become a tradition, a way of staying connected to the larger mission that had grown from their personal tragedy. Marcel landed and approached with his usual grin, but Terrence could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "Boss, we've got updates on the Jakarta operation." The Jakarta operation was one of dozens running globally. Terrence's organization now worked with international law enforcement to dismantle human trafficking networks, protect endangered children, and ensure that predators face consequences regardless of their wealth or connections. "The rescue was successful," Marcel continued. 43 children recovered, network completely dismantled. The local authorities said it was the most professional operation they'd ever seen. "Any connections to the old Golden Network?" Terrence asked. "Several. Turns out Randall's business partners thought they could continue operations after his death. They were wrong." Emma, who had been listening with the serious attention she brought to all matters of justice, nodded approvingly. "Good. Children should be safe. It was a simple statement that carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. Emma had become something unprecedented, a child advocate who understood predators from personal experience, who could spot danger that adults missed, who had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger rather than broken. "There's something else," Marcel said, his tone shifting. "We've been approached by a consortium of tech companies. They want to fund a new initiative, a global monitoring system for child protection. They're calling it the Emma Protocol." Terence looked at his daughter, who was studying the proposal with the analytical mind she'd inherited from him. "What do you think?" "I think," Emma said carefully, "that if we can stop other families from going through what we went through, then what happened to us meant something." It was a profound statement from someone who would start 5th grade in the fall. But Emma had never been an ordinary child, and her experiences had only sharpened the intelligence that had originally made her a target. That evening, as father and daughter stood on their deck watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson, Terence reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. He'd lost his faith in mercy, in second chances, in the redemptive power of forgiveness. But he gained something more valuable: absolute clarity about justice, unwavering protection for those who couldn't protect themselves, and a daughter who understood that strength came not from avoiding darkness, but from refusing to let it define you. "Daddy," Emma said, "do you ever miss the way things were before?" Terence considered the question seriously. Before the yacht, he'd been a successful businessman with a seemingly happy family, living a life built on illusions of safety and trust. Now he was something else entirely, a guardian standing between predators and their prey, a father who would never again mistake civility for virtue